Next up, I'll introduce, in some ways I introduced yesterday, many of you have met, John and Rudy, the leadership team for NOSC Little Rock. And they're going to go through their journey. They're going to leave some time for Q&A. We'll do that, and then you're going to have sleep class. So for those of you who fell asleep and started snoring, you'll get a second chance. So we'll do that. And then afterwards, Tom and I will come back here. We're going to do it a little bit more informally. I think Tom is going to show you and walk through some of from the metrics standpoint. One of the neat parts about some of these tools is it gives an ability for some leading indicators around kind of performance, around some of these team sensors that haven't been before. So we'll give you a bit of preview and Tom will walk you through that. But we're really going to do more open Q&A about leading into the next session, which is really, you'll be partnered kind of with your team, with at least one or two next jumpers, really around adoption, to give you a little bit more kind of free time to be thinking about, talking about, what in here, whether it's a jump start, whether it's with technology, whether it's without, ways that you can kind of start within your team. So Tom and I will leave some time for just some open questions, for that. So this is, we're transitioning more into, to this time into the work itself. So without further ado, actually, maybe I have one other part. I did want to welcome and kind of introduce John's better half, Melissa, back there. Welcome. So I don't know if she's delighted or appalled about what she's about to see, but welcome to Melissa. So without further ado, I'm going to turn over to John and Rudy and really talk about their experience with the NOSC Little Rock.
Awesome, thanks. If you have any feedback for me, you can put it in the app. Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I know from the guest list that I'm briefing an incredibly senior group, so I think it's worth mentioning that we're not up here as an 04 and a chief petty officer trying to say that we know more than you or that we have a secret formula for you that's going to work better than your 20, 30 plus years of experience. But what we will offer is that what I'm about to brief is how Little Rock got to a better best than we were at, significantly better. And a lot of it was through great coaching at Next Jump, and the tools that they've given us have been invaluable. And after what we've learned the last day and a half, I hope it gives you some ground level perspective on how seeing them implemented can work. I'd like to thank Melissa for coming out. This was super cool. We have 2 toddlers, and I feel like I'm getting a chance to introduce her to my Next Jump family now after all this time. She knows everyone's name, but now she knows all their faces too. I want to thank my Commodore, Captain Todd Perry. He was 100% responsible for getting this kicked off, in so many ways, just gave us complete permission to run with it, and we did. And he's not, at least that I know of, had to pull me back by the shirt at any time because he was uncomfortable. He's helped me all along the way. And then my TP chief, Rudy Gonzalez, my SCL right hand and partner. He was my first follower, and I think that's paramount. We'll get to that. And I want to thank Beth Newton and Elizabeth Gilligan, our coaches, who have been here every step of the way to help us along. So command is one of those career milestones that it's an absolute privilege. And I was blessed with the opportunity to slate to NOSC Little Rock in summer of 2018. It was an incredible gift to get that opportunity as an 04. Not a lot of 04s achieve command, and it really opened some doors for me to develop myself as a leader. But I inherited an incredibly lax culture in Little Rock. I ended up reporting early July of last year. I had a plan set up with my predecessor. I had my nice uniform on, and I walk up to the door. I buzz the door to let them know that I'm there, and literally nobody answered the door. I was so pissed with my first observation of the command. And sometimes you get that first impression, you can't shake it. Sometimes you can shake it. This is one that I couldn't. And as I started peeling the onion back in the command, I realized that there was a lot of issues going on. There wasn't regular uniform wear. There was no such thing as working hours there. I in turning over with my predecessor, learned that although he had inherited it, the last triennial command assessment, which is a big deal, was a complete failure for Little Rock. And I know that I came in guns a-blazing. I was pretty emotional about turnover, and within the fourth day in command, made some immediate changes and kind of set this journey in motion. So when you assume command, you have 90 days to establish a baseline for your climate, how you're doing. Most CEOs will actually run that like within the first week. So you're not grading yourself, you're actually grading your predecessor, and it gives you an understanding of what you inherited, but it doesn't necessarily give you any information about how you're doing. So I had just this brilliant idea with all these drastic guns a-blazing changes that I made that I'd wait till day 85 and see how I did, because they're just going to love this stuff that I'm doing. This is what they thought. Rarely is a team able to perform with such truly convincing smiles on their faces. Now, I read that the first time I got the results, and I was actually like, oh, that's kind of a nice comment. And then I reread it. I was like, holy shit. Since the new CEO arrived, there's an attempt to become over-effective, which at the time was kind of funny because I thought I was being just the right amount of effective. Overall, decline of happiness was a theme that came up in probably 8 separate comments. And then this last one, which I never really addressed with the staff, is it's a shame to see that the staff will be subject to the leadership. I like that they use the bunny quotes of an inexperienced junior officer trying to make a name for himself.
So as the SEL, this on? I knew immediately that I had very little trust, and deservedly so. I take ownership for failing the previous CEO, or at least not pushing my agenda more than I needed to. And so when Commander Wainwright came on board, I was going from an 05 to an 04. I knew that it was his first command. I knew he just got done working for an admiral. And then I saw the glasses and I thought, this guy's gonna really make my life hell. And so as I said, I knew he didn't have trust in me. I didn't have a lot of trust in him. I didn't even know who he was. Honestly, if you'd have given me truth serum, that probably would have been the comment that came out of my mouth. Just at first glance, that's what I felt like he was doing. And as somebody had mentioned, I think Greg had mentioned earlier, usually CEOs wait about 30 days before they make any changes. And rightfully so. I think he came in and immediately started to change things, but you're going to get some visceral feedback from the command when you do those things. And I think he experienced that firsthand.
100%. And so the day after the results came back, just for context, these results get sent to you as the CEO, and then they actually get sent to your next boss in line, Captain Perry in this case. And so I opened the results. Of course, I mean, just lost all color in my face. And on the way to work the next day, I hadn't even really had a chance to process this. He called me and said, hey, I was wondering if you might be interested in going out to this academy at Next Jump to see about implementing some new leadership techniques. And I was just like, I'm in. He's like, don't you want to know it? No, I'm in. I'm a big believer that there's no coincidences. And this was one that just, the timing couldn't have been any better. There's 2 things that I picked up from my first academy that kind of resonated with me. One of them was a little of what you saw yesterday, where very junior level associates or interns stood up during a 10X and really put themselves out there, really made themselves vulnerable. And it was one of the most impressive things that I've ever seen. The second thing I was incredibly impressed with was a journey that was briefed by Christian Lemieux that showed kind of a saw-style climbing graph of his perceived path, his journey. The journey briefed by Christian really had an impact on me. And I couldn't explain back at the academy what I was seeing. I just knew it felt good. So when I got back from academy, I had a choice. I still had these burning survey results sitting on my desk, and I had to figure out a way how I was going to address them with the staff. And truth be told, my first instinct prior to academy was to just lie my way through it. There's a series of statistics in there, and if you dig hard enough, you can find a stat that makes you look favorable. And I was like, you know what? I'm just going to go after those. This is bullshit. I don't feel like I should have to address some of this. I'm right. But after academy, I realized there was actually a second choice, and what I had seen in next jump was just addressing it head on. And so what I did was I actually built a brief of that same slide you just saw and threw it up in front of the staff and talked through it. Like, many of you are unhappy with me. I understand. I accept the feedback. I didn't do that last one just because I thought it was kind of crappy and not good feedback. But, just showing them that I could see a theme and that they were being heard was incredibly powerful. And what it did initially, although we didn't know at the time, in kind of kicking off our journey, was we built trust. So it was a huge trust builder for the staff. But I never backed down on my expectations of them. We as a team eventually, we'll talk to how we came to common ground on that. But I let them know I was listening, but that I wasn't changing the course or direction on what we were doing. So all the sadness aside, where are we today? So we've got some huge wins. And like I said, these are Little Rock wins. These aren't necessarily wins that I feel like you need at your command. But for us, these are the measurable results we've had thus far. About month 6, which had we learned some of the lessons earlier in this process, we probably could have learned them in about 3 months. But in our journey, first of all, we passed our most recent triennial assessment where we had previously failed. We passed with an excellent overall, or 84%. One of the most telling statistics from CO's standpoint was the team also topped the scorecard that very next month. And I had seen previously where you kind of get through your inspection, you want to take the pack off, and some teams drop on their metric snapshot for the following month. Little Rock was actually number 1 for that month following, which is most interesting because my team hadn't actually seen the scorecard. They were too worried about inspection. So they had actually had a really rocking month, but they didn't do it through anything but just doing their jobs. We've exposed some huge problems that all the DoD branches are going after right now. Out of our full-time staff of 10, we've got about 7, now actually 8, who are seeking some sort of mental health support, victim support for sexual trauma, military sexual trauma, family counseling, marital counseling, things like that. We had a decent jump in our advancement this past cycle. So of our enlisted who tested for advancement to the next rate, we advanced 30% of those eligible last cycle. This cycle, we were at 35%, which was the highest here recently. We've implemented a culture of fitness. So most recently, we had 28 who scored excellent or above, which for Navy rewards you with not having to take the next test. You can see we were at 19 was our previous high in spring of 2018. But what's interesting is that we talked about lagging indicators briefly yesterday. And we actually saw the team expectation score in the feedback app kind of level out in that sweet spot of we think we can do better, and we started actually doing better. It was terribly interesting from a command standpoint. And this is how we got there. We're going to expound on a lot of these to tell you a little bit more about it, and we've had some exposure to them over the last day and a half, but we use the arc of the swamp to describe this. So starting up at the top left with my choice on how to handle my burning survey results, we kind of had that downward trend. It was a little bit painful. We've had several stalls, but we like to boil it down with knowing what we've learned here, that it was basically 2 phases. One was kind of turning on the sailor's voice, turning the sensors on, giving them an opportunity to speak and let them know that we were listening. And the other is setting a performance focus, letting them know that we have high expectations and that we're not going to back down on those. With that, I'll let Chief tell you about how we got this thing kicked off following the DEOCs.
Thanks, sir. So we mentioned how the CO addressing his MEO feedback built a little bit of trust. I want to emphasize the importance of this journey brief, and then I'll kind of explain what it is. But this was the event that really instilled trust, not only the sailors to the CO, but it got me on board with this entire process. And so a journey brief, for those of you who are not familiar, is when you kind of just you could either cap your career, you could cap your entire life if you wanted to, but the CO chose to do his career. And you highlight the highs, the lows, and he did something very interesting, which was really pointed out the LHFing throughout his career. And so you could see in some of these parts, it's bolded. And what that did was I saw immediate buy-in from the sailors. I saw them, it was weird, while it was happening, to see them look at him not just as their commanding officer, but as a human. It humanized him. It made him real. It let them know that he had made some mistakes in his career that he was owning up to. It let me know that he had made some mistakes, and that I knew that he, hadn't just been an admiral's aide and fast tracked it up to CO as a lieutenant commander. And more importantly, what I started to do while he was actually briefing, about halfway through his brief, I started to map out my own journey brief. And I was already, by the end of his brief, I said, I want to go next. And because I saw how much trust and capital he built with this staff. And so this ritual was so important to us, and we say trust accelerator down at the bottom, but this really fast tracked us from going from a command where we had very low trust in leadership and in each other for that matter, to really seeing each other as just humans. And even though they recognized the rank, they now recognized us as people, and people who had made mistakes in their career and people who had excelled in certain parts of their career too. And so this directly led to the TP. So we've talked about training partners, and while getting your sailors and the people in your organization to be training partners will come later on, I think it was very important for us to start to build that relationship and to be TPs, not just training partners, but talking partners. And so what we originally thought of as the training partner, when it was explained to me, because I had not been to Academy yet, just so you guys know, was just somebody that I could talk to about my feedback, because my first feedback was a 1 and I was not happy. And so I thought, well, I can talk to my training partner about that. What we eventually learned from that is it's really just a place where we can go and solve problems together. We catch up daily. We learn about each other's day, what's going on, how we're dealing with problems. And as it's grown, it's helped us to make tough decisions. We don't always agree on things. We found that we do tend to think more alike now than we did previously, but just last week we had an issue where we thought completely different on a situation, and we were able to solve it without any stress or drama and get the mission completed. But it is very important that the triad, in our case, just 2 of us, but the triad be able to build those relationships, especially when you're dealing with someone who's coming in new or even someone who's been there for a while. But you're always going to have turnover, and building that trust between the triad is really big for us.
And just to add on quickly to that, it was much more important that we built our trust in that TP relationship than it was for the sailors on the deck plate. We thought it was as important. Initially, it wasn't. It just wasn't. They didn't see us aligned. We weren't going anywhere. So by this point, we had set a pretty safe environment to open up to feedback. We started off with paper initially. It just kind of got us some muscle memory going, but it wasn't necessarily a prerequisite. This morning, it was kind of alluded to during the SW by Charlie that, if Next Jump as a whole were receiving feedback, it would just kind of turn into a complaint box of things that the company should do for people. And that's what we did with the paper. But it did let the CELRES know that we were listening, and we had a few opportunities to let our reservists know that we were listening through that. But we opened up with several visceral meetings. Our very first meeting, I actually went first. So by now you got to realize, I've gone up in front of them 3 times with something that was kind of a big deal, and nobody else had gone at this point. And I briefed pride and professionalism, which for our non-military attendees, that's basically traditionally a brief where you tell everyone that they're not wearing their uniform correctly, they're not showing up at the right hours, they're not saluting. You remind them of all the basics of military service. So pride and professionalism was a great one to go first. And, at first it was kind of a BZ factory, Bravo Zulu, you get this pat on the back. So me as a leader, I'm getting all these 4s and 3s. I mean, my head's getting big. I'm feeling even more arrogant than before. The rollout of feedback initially was a little bit of a distraction for us. It was nice to brief. It was nice to get the feedback. But one of the ways that I misused feedback initially was with the stage setters that I described to you, I thought the feedback was going to be like my force multiplier. Like, all these people, I know you're seeing all this stuff going on in the command. Why aren't you calling each other out? Why aren't we self-policing yet? In my mind, I'm like, well, it's been 4 months. Why don't you get it yet? And out of a 3-year tour, that's a relatively short amount of time. But I thought once we had the app that I would have other people feeling more comfortable. And it was almost a little bit of the opposite. And I ended up using the app as kind of a crutch at first, which my sailors completely saw through.
Yeah, so the feedback app, the rollout, we got a lot of feedback in the first couple months. And like Commander mentioned, a lot of it was low calorie. It was a lot of, hey, doing a great job. You know, you're really good at what you do. There were some comments in there that were not helpful, but pretty negative. As Commander Creel referred to at his command, there were some times when we were like, yeah, you know, maybe this isn't helping very much. But as we started to coach how to give proper feedback and talk about what feedback really is for, we started to notice the trends getting a little better. And as I said earlier, my first feedback was a 1, and learning that trying to not relate feedback to the eval scale and saying a 1 means you're bad and a 4 means you're good. As we started to explain that more, if we'd have known a little more than we knew then, I think we could have avoided some of those swampy areas. But now we welcome the 1s. And in fact, Commander got a 1 last week, and I went to him, and I was actually kind of mad because it should have been for me. and I like to address those. I like to put that out there. I like to get the information to the sailors, because a lot of times what we've seen is a lot of the 1s are sailors who don't have all the information. They're telling themselves a certain story and coming to a conclusion on their own, and it gives us a chance to be transparent with them and let them know that you may think that this is happening, but let us tell you what's really going on as best we can. Sometimes we can't because of situations, but it helps us communicate better with them and be more transparent.
And so we learned from this too, with the ebb and flow of feedback, that the feedback itself wasn't really going to work unless we had some deliberate practices where we were using it. Like I had this vision, like kind of at Next Jump, somebody walks by and does something that's bad, somebody's going to jump right there on the app, and we were just going to have hundreds of pieces a day where people are self-correcting, and that just wasn't the case. And so once we saw feedback dry up about the first time, it got a little swampy around the command. The gossip circles got spun up. The grapevine machines were back up and running full speed. And so we didn't really know much about 10X. I had seen it. He hadn't. I just knew it was goodness and that we needed it. And so we rolled it out about a month after our feedback dried up the first time. And this kind of got us into phase 2, where we're starting to set expectations for performance. 10X is interesting because it took us 3 tries to actually hone in on what actually works. And that was a huge lesson learned for us. But we did leadership 10Xs yesterday. Our main focus initially was on mission 10Xs, and that is the idea that you get your sailors, your employees, your airmen out in front of people with an idea about the way that work could be better. You have somebody stand up, and it could be a very simple project or plan or initiative that they just kind of put it out there to the group. Everyone provides feedback on the work. At first, we were worried about, like, oh, you said a lot of ums and ahs, and, you know, you had your arms crossed and you were, you know, swaying back and forth. It's like, that's not going to make the person work harder. What I want is performance. And so we kind of got away from that and started saying, you know what, screw the polish, just start getting out there and give me something work-wise. And it was extremely successful after the 3rd time. And we kind of learned that the feedback really needs 10X to be an effective mechanism for improving.
Yeah, so as the CO mentioned, it really took us a little bit of time to figure out what 10X was for. And I think part of that was I just didn't understand. I hadn't been to an academy, like you said. And so it was hard for me to wrap my head around people getting up there and just talking about their feelings and how that was going to improve or make us more lethal as a force, as a Navy. And it wasn't until our 3rd try that something clicked. And I realized that if phase 1 was turning on the sensors, phase 2 was where we started to show them what we expected of them and how this was going to help us be better sailors, how it was going to help us complete missions better. And so once we started to look at how people could brief their programs, how people could show those briefs or share those briefs with other commands who are struggling with that certain program, and how we could maybe work that into a regional thing and get people on board with briefing things weekly or monthly, it would really help us as a whole improve what we were doing. And then that it could translate into operational commands to other administrative commands where people are just trying to work on things that are internal to them.
So what's interesting about 10X, as you saw yesterday, is there's public judging. So I mentioned I've gone first now 3 times. Chief's gone once. We've got this new ritual. I was like, I'm not doing another one first. I'm over it. Like, I'm tired of putting myself out there. But in me judging my sailors, this caused kind of a second stall. We were almost like feeling more swampy after 10X because, like, oh crap, now the CO's providing me public feedback. I've had this, sort of entitlement where he's trying really hard. He's putting himself out there. He's briefing with feedback. And now this is my turn, publicly, mind you, to provide that two-way feedback. And so we had a little bit of drama afterwards, but we leveled out nicely. So I think it's an important pause to tell you that at this point, we probably had about 6 of our core 10 staff that were really starting to buy in. And some of the advice we received was kind of coming up with a way to reward those people. It's very important that you recognize your first followers, the people that support you, as you roll this out. And so we created kind of a council we're calling our power influencers. So the first 4 to 6 folks who bought in, by this point, we're rewarding them with access to new rituals, which we'll get into. And those 2 are coaching and On My Mind. We also made this nifty patch so that on their camo, they can slap something on their shoulder that says, I'm part of the Cheetah team. I'm making the organization better. And that's had its challenges, but the main issue was like rewarding those who really put themselves out there and start buying into this early on has been a unique opportunity to show others through a little bit of peer pressure that this is the right path. And so, I mean, the same week that we actually rolled out 10X, we rolled out the situation workshops. And I think everyone got a good feel for what that looks like this morning. I think in the military, especially as you get more senior, like Captain mentioned earlier today, like you're not very good at coaching at the junior level, but it's funny when you're a little more senior, you feel like you're the best at it. Like I was born for this. And so I jumped in feet first to coaching and had a huge screw up that I want to tell you about. So I had a sailor who was kind of walking around the command sulking one day. I had just come from coaching academy. Chief Gonzalez was out of town, and that always gets me into some trouble, not having somebody to ground me. But I had another chief there that I trusted, and I saw the guy walking by, and I was like, I look over at the chief, I'm like, let's go coach the shit out of him. And we did. We sat him down at the table, 2-on-1. I think he thought it was like some disciplinary review board, like he thinks he's in trouble. Totally pushed him away. So it went from what I perceived to be my biggest strength and what I was made for in this world to being one of my biggest weaknesses and one of the most difficult things I've ever done correctly. So I was actually thrilled to have the opportunity to practice this morning.
So the situational workshops have, to me, been probably my favorite ritual that we practice. And from the perspective of a senior enlisted leader, this is our job. This is what we do. We're there to mold the enlisted community, to help them grow. What I had never experienced, though, was actually letting them solve their own problems. And that was something that this introduced to us, is instead of telling a sailor, here's how you fix your problem, or here's how you solve this problem, allowing them to explain their problem and just listen to them and then try to talk them through it so that they can have some ownership of their own issues. They can have ownership of solving their own problems. They feel accomplished. They don't feel like somebody did it for them. And that was what really resonated with me with the situational workshops. But it was also a great opportunity to see different perspectives from my boss. So when we coached sailors, to be able to give 2 different perspectives and know that, man, I never would have even thought of that if he hadn't have mentioned it. And then for the sailor to be able to take both of those, go back, LBR on it and think about how they're going to respond. And then they've been consistently good at responding after the situational workshop. I haven't been that good at doing that, but they've been really good, and they've taken to it a lot. And I think it's going to help our Chiefs mess get better at being leaders as well as we move this into the mess to the reserve community.
And just to mention it one more time, when we rolled out coaching, we only coach people who want to be coached. And that means that they're putting themselves out there in other ways. So our power influencers have head of the line on our time. because they're putting the time in as well. About a month later, we rolled out the On My Mind ritual. And this has been at first it was very vague for us what value this would add, but it's actually been one of the most insightful tools we've implemented, because much like coaching, we're starting to see things that our people are thinking. And I actually called out a trend here. It's kind of funny. And I don't know that I wasn't driving this, but it still called out to me. It gives us a lot of insight on how the command overall is doing. So here I am on Friday. I'm very frustrated when I leave work. I've got 2 sad faces. At the time, just to get the ritual going, I was sharing this with my whole team. And that come in Monday, and everyone else is frustrated now. So it just kind of was a great reminder and insight for me to understand a little bit more about what people are feeling and what sort of control I might have over that.
Yeah, the On My Mind has been a great tool for me personally to look at patterns in my week. So if I'm upset on a Friday and I see that I've consistently been upset for 3 weeks, it allows me to go back and kind of review those weeks and say what got me there. And conversely, if I'm always happy on Monday, then my weekends are probably going well. But if it's the opposite, if I'm happy on Monday and upset on Friday, then something went wrong during the week. So I haven't been the greatest at being consistent with this, and I need to be. And the CEO has done a good job of reminding me of that. But for me in the commander, it's really just me going to him, and I've tried to make it a habit of every morning kind of giving him what's on my mind, and we try to sync up like that every day. But the most important part for me is to be able to look daily or weekly and see how my sailors are doing, and see if it's trending in the same direction. If all the sailors are feeling the same way, then that's something that we probably need to address. But if it's 1 or 2, then maybe we just need to address them individually. So it's a great tool for that, and some of the things that they're putting into the app here shortly, I think, is going to help us even more in determining patterns and finding solutions for some of the issues that we're dealing with.
And so this was kind of my attempt at like an academic just snapshot of where I see all this kind of fitting into the bigger picture. So we've learned in working with Next Jump that there's 2 pillars to the high performing team. One of them is trust and high expectations. One builds your defense, one builds your offense. Another way of looking at it might be trust being kind of your psychological safety, and high expectations sort of being, everyone holding each other accountable. But we saw the journey in On My Mind as trust builders. The TPs, like I said, we haven't placed heavy emphasis on that amongst the command, but at least for us, it helped us with both our expectations of each other and maintaining trust. And the feedback and the 10X and the coaching, we think, is a great extension to kind of remind the staff where expectations could be a little bit higher for themselves. And this is kind of what a snapshot of our week looks like. So I know that Charlie showed the slide yesterday of what a Next Jump week looks like, but this is really, for an On My Mind in the afternoon twice a week, we're talking maybe 5 minutes. We already had a Monday kickoff meeting that we were holding. I think most Navy commands will either do quarters daily or at the beginning of the week. And what we're going to try to implement is ending our weeks a little bit more deliberately. We have a tendency to kind of scatter out, and I think a more deliberate ending is going to add a lot of value for us. But I said all that to tell you that really Tuesday has been the only major change for us, and it's only been for an hour a week. We do most things about once a month, and so that Tuesday, we call it the developmental hour or the magic hour, whatever you want to call it. It's just been a great time for us to tweak time that we already had blocked off and turn it into something more productive. The last thing I wanted to say personally, and I'll give you the last word, is all through this process, I believe that, kind of falling on my face as a new CEO was a great experience. And I don't know that I would have changed anything. I probably could have approached things a little more softly, but I don't know that I would have changed. But since we started doing this, I think the self-awareness for us both has been invaluable. It was important enough that I brought my wife out because I think it's making me a little bit better of a husband. I think it's making me a little bit better of a father. And I'm seeing that in my sailors as well. They're taking better care of themselves. And I won't get on the soapbox, but I would tell you, I would recommend this to anybody.
And I'll I'll close out the way we kind of started. Is this is what worked for NOS Little Rock. We're a small command of 10 staff and 140-ish reservists. And we were able to, make mistakes and correct those mistakes. How it scales to other commands, I don't know. How would this work on a ship or in a squadron when you go on deployment? I have no idea, but I know that there are ways to make it work. You can use the app when you can use the app, and the goal, as Greg and Tom have mentioned before, is to use as little tech as possible and to have people talking face to face, and that's what we've seen. We saw our numbers go from upwards of 40 pieces of feedback when we first started this down to about 12, but what we have seen is sailors talking to sailors bringing their problems to us directly, figuring out problems on their own, coming up with solutions, coming up with ideas. And that's what the entire intent was, to build those lines of communication. Our problem was communication, and the solution was getting them to communicate with us. And we've done it. And we've had a ton of help, a ton of support from our regional staff and our coaches. But I think it's doable at every command and every organization. You just got to find a way to make it your own.